Again, quick review. Israel has been led to Mount Sinai. They're in the land of Midian, and they're going to spend about a year at this mountain. As God gives them instruction, a lot's going to happen. If you are just wanting to know biblically, we're here in Exodus chapter 20, the book of Leviticus, and 9 chapters into Numbers will all happen within this year at this mountain. God, as we've just reviewed, He's given them 10 laws that are specifically designed for the people to stay within God's boundaries. These laws help us the exact same way. Verses 3 through 17, God tells us that we are to have no other gods before Him. That we are to make no graven image of Him. We are not to take His name in vain. We're to remember the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother. Don't murder. Don't commit sexual sin. Don't steal. Don't lie, and don't covet. It took us 3 Wednesdays to get through those 10. So now, let's pick up in verse 18. He says, now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightnings, the flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Now this must have been a frightening sight for these people. I mean, they not only hear the voice of God, but they are viewing His power being displayed. So why did God show Himself to Israel in this way? Verse 19. Then they, the people, said to Moses, you speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that you may fear, and that His fear may be before you, so that you may not sin. Now, have you ever prayed for the Lord to speak clearly to you about something? I think we all have, but here God has spoken, and He's been pretty clear. But the people didn't respond with awe and wonder. They responded with fear. I mean, what we find out is that they didn't really want to hear from God personally. They concluded that they would rather hear from God through Moses. They wanted a mediator, per se, between them and God. But who's our mediator today? Yeah, Jesus. It starts with a J and ends with Jesus. Listen, every answer, every biblical answer is always Jesus. Okay? 1 Timothy 2 verse 5 says, Paul wrote to Timothy, for there is one God and one mediator between God and men, and that man, Christ Jesus. So if you're praying for the Lord to speak to you, I would ask that you would start with this. You need to start spending more time in your Bible. See, God will be very clear in His Word. His Word will give you discernment in the things that you hear, because what you hear, if it's from the Lord, will never contradict His Word. Never. So at Mount Sinai, God has been very clear with His people that He's serious about His standards and that He's serious about His relationship with the people. And He's also letting us know that sin is serious. We have just read about our mediator. Our only hope is in Jesus. And as we learn to humble ourselves before the Lord, our relationship with the Father grows deeper. And I think that's what we all want, right? Verse 22. Then the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make anything to be with me. Gods of silver or gods of gold you shall not make for yourselves. So God's presence is seen by all, and He has spoken from heaven. And God again reminds Moses of the second commandment. Don't try to make any image that you think would represent me. Now He has some instructions for offerings that Moses and the people are to bring to Him. Verse 24. The altar of earth that you shall make for me, you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep, your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you and I will bless you. And if you make me an altar of stone, it shall not be built of hewn stone, for if you use your tool on it, you have profaned it. Nor shall you go up the steps to my altar that your nakedness may be seen, so that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. So the instruction here, when the children of Israel bring sacrifices to God to offer, it should be on a pile of rocks, pile of dirt. Nothing man-made should be on the altar. It shouldn't be high. It should be ground level. So when it comes time to sacrifice, the place that you choose, talking to Moses, God says he'll be there. God will meet you where you are. Now again, we haven't gotten any temple instructions yet, right? So in the meantime, this is the functionality of offerings and sacrifices. Now in chapter 21 through 23, God is going to give laws of a wide variety. He's going to talk about employment and servants, murder, manslaughter, liability and responsibility for one's livestock, theft and restitution, premarital sex, and the value of virginity. He's going to talk about sorcery. He's going to talk about how to care for the weak and the disadvantaged in society. He's going to give laws about money, lending, and overall justice. And you'll notice as we go through these that many of these laws are adapted to some way today in our laws. Now, these laws are guidelines for the judges of each city of Israel to govern by. God will instruct Moses later on how to establish those judges. But right now we're talking about these specific laws and their descriptions. But they are very applicable by principle in many other ways. It's not we're just reading one law and that's how it works. It is applicable in other areas. So let's pick up in chapter 21, verse 1. Now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go free and pay nothing. If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. Now, we must remember that slavery in the Old Testament is not defined in the terms that we have used in the past 200 years. Slavery in the Old Testament came about because people were in debt or in need, and then they borrowed. Biblical slavery was working off debt that was accumulated. These are God's guidelines in dealing with this kind of slavery. When a servant is bought, someone is paying the debt that servant owes, and now that servant works off that debt for the master. On the 7th year, whether the debt is completely paid or not, the servant is free from that debt. And he takes with him what he came in with. Now remember, again, slaves or servants in Israel were not like the descriptions of slaves today. The Bible is responsible for eliminating slavery that is described today. Never promotes it. Verse 4. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons and daughters, and the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. So somewhere within this time frame, this man who is serving a master gets a wife and has children, right? But the description here is being told to us that the wife is indebted some way as well. Again, we must understand the context. If this man served 6 years, he is allowed to go free, but the wife that he has taken within this 6-year period probably has debt, and she still has to pay her debt, right? Until her 6 years is completed or the debt is paid. This isn't that they cannot have any contact with each other. It's just her debt is still owed, and she needs to work it off. Understand, in this concept, filing bankruptcy is never an option in God's economy. Now, that sounds pretty harsh, but the reality is this. If a debt has been accumulated, it needs to be worked off. But on the 7th year, all debts are wiped clean. We don't like part of it, and we really like part of it, right? Now, again, this is Israel's law. This isn't Great Britain's law. Verse 5, but if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife and my children, I will not go free. Then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to a door or to a doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Now, fast forward to the New Testament a minute. Many times the Apostle Paul describes himself as a bondservant of Jesus Christ. Not a servant of Jesus Christ, but a bondservant. See, these verses, what we're reading here, describes what the New Testament describes as either a servant or a bondservant. See, in the New Testament, a servant is like what's happening here. They're working off debt, okay? But a bondservant, what Paul says, is describing what's happening here. Paul says he's a bondservant of Jesus Christ. So what he's saying is this: I don't just work for Jesus for a paycheck and then I go home and do whatever I want to do. I serve the master 24/7. I am dependent on the master for everything. Here in the Old Testament, a bondservant is signified by having an earring. There was a ceremony that happened with the town and the judges. A person was brought to the doorpost. They didn't have the fancy things that we have today for getting an earring. Remember that little gun? Yeah, okay. So you get up next to a door and they put your ear up here and they grabbed some kind of nail and pounded a hole in your ear. Sounds wonderful, right? But then a ring was put in it, and that signified that that person said, listen, I love my master so much. He has treated me so well. I want to serve him forever. And that person would have an earring. Pretty interesting, right? See, he didn't want to leave, and he publicly committed that he would serve that master. Verse 7. Now, if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do, if she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself. Then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food or clothing or her marriage rights. And if he does not do these three for her, then she shall go out free without paying money. Now we have to understand, again, context. This is an issue of an arranged marriage, which was very common in this culture. A marriage is negotiated by the bride's family and the groom's family. And maybe what we see here is that the bride's family is indebted some way to the groom's family, because a groom would have to pay a dowry, right? And when that dowry was paid to the bride's family, then he could come and get his wife. What happened in this culture is that there was a betrothal ceremony. So here's what it looked like. Mom and dad negotiated, hey, our two kids are going to get married. They would go before the priest and they would say their marriage vows. They would get a ring, and then they went back home. And the groom earned or got enough money, when he got the money for the dowry, then he would take it to the bride's father, and then the bride's father would say, it's time to celebrate and consummate the marriage. Then there was a big celebration, sometimes 7 days. The groom would send somebody to get his bride. She was carried to the groom's house, and then there was a celebration up to 7 days, right? So completely backwards from how we do it today, right? This is what's going on. So what happens here in this scenario? The groom, this girl, is working off the debt, in a sense, working off what her parents owe, so that the dowry isn't as much that they have to pay back. But something happens. They say, hey, you know what? This girl's been serving here, working off this debt, and my son is not getting along with your daughter. This probably isn't going to work. So she's allowed to be free from that obligation, right? And she gets free, and then her parents don't owe the groom's family any more money. So there's this really interesting protection that is happening for this bride-to-be. And because of the choice of the groom's family, she's allowed to return home. Now again, nothing's been consummated. There's just been a verbal commitment. And the groom has broken this verbal commitment, so that's what he's describing here. Okay, now we're going to change gears and we're going to talk about laws of violence. Look at verse 12. Some of these we looked at last week. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. Premeditated murder gets the death penalty. It does not violate the thou shalt not murder law. Because this person murdered somebody, the law is that they are to be put to death. Verse 13, however, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him to his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. So you got two people that end up having a physical fight. Things get out of hand and someone is hurt. Someone is killed. The survivor of that fight will need to head to a place of refuge. There were 7 cities within the land of Israel that were called places of refuge for things specifically like this, because there was also a law of vengeance, right? Like if somebody came in, if somebody broke into my house and took my stuff and killed my wife, I was allowed by law to go find that guy, right? But if it was all accidental, like what's happening here, then that person was allowed to go to a place, a city of refuge in God's design, and they had to stay there the rest of their lives until the high priest died. Again, understand, this is God's law. This isn't Great Britain's law. And we're like, I don't know if I like that or not, or I think I really do like that or not. Well, okay, but this is what Israel, their law was established by the Lord. Because this guy that got into a fight and accidentally killed this guy, that guy's family is probably going to come after him. So he gets to run somewhere. It wasn't intentional. Look at verse 14. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. So back to premeditated murder here. Even if the guilty party, God says, runs to the altar and grabs it and says, God, save me. God says, no, you are not going to be saved. You committed murder. You will pay the punishment. There is no sanctuary, even in God, with God's altar, that will free this man from his penalty of murder. He will be put to death. Verse 15, if he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Wow. Now remember the 5th commandment about honoring your parents? God's taking that seriously. So This law supports the institution of marriage and the institution of family, and parents are to be honored. Verse 16. Everybody having fun so far? He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. So if someone is kidnapped, that offense is equal ground with murder in God's economy. The kidnapper gets the death penalty. Kidnapping or forced slavery was also very common in this day and age. Sadly, it's common today. I just pulled up an interesting statistic. Now we're talking kidnapping, forced slavery here. We're not talking about somebody that's in debt. From January 2023 to July 2024 in the UK revealed that 1,541 children have been abducted into slavery. 230 girls, 1,311 boys. Adults, 1,714 adults, 1,244 men and 470 women were trafficked out of the UK within that time period. We got a problem. Verse 17, he who curses his father or mother shall surely be put to death. If this was law today, I might not be here. I don't know if any of you ever said some pretty mean things to your parents because you didn't like what was going on, but I did, confessing. And this brings to mind, listen, this interesting discipline of controlling what comes out of our mouths. See, the idea here is an adult child, not a child. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 18 through 21 will give clear instruction that parents were never allowed to carry out this penalty of punishment. These cases were reviewed by the judges of the city, and parents, listen carefully, parents did not have absolute power of life over their children. Interesting law. Verse 18. If men contend with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of time and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. Now again, we have a conflict, and a man is not able to work because of an injury in this fight or this conflict, whatever happened. The person that caused the infraction has to pay compensation for his time off or until he's healed. Once this man is recovered, compensation ends. Interesting law. Verse 20. If a man beats his male servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. Now again, this sounds super harsh, but we got to understand context. What is going on here is God is specifically calling out that masters or people that are oversight of people in servitude have to treat them correctly. Abuse was never tolerated by the Lord. Never. This warning is for masters to protect his servants. And in this culture of the day, some masters did abuse their servants, but under God's law, a servant is a human being and should be treated with respect regardless of position or status in life. Verse 22, if men fight, now again, we went over this last week, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but he said if men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished according to as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Verse 23, but if harm follows the child, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. And again, as we discussed last week, in God's economy, human life in the womb has the same value as human life outside of the womb. Verse 26. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall set him free. He shall be set free to go for the sake of his eye. If he knocks out a tooth of his male servant or female servant, then he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. Now, the principle of eye for eye is different for servants. See, if a servant is injured by his master, the servant automatically gets set free. These laws, again, are given for the master to have incentive to protect and provide for their servants. And in this sense, he's just calling out, listen, a servant is not to be treated like an animal. Now, animal laws. Ready? Verse 28. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. All right, so we got an ox that has never shown aggression. Anyway, all of a sudden shows aggression and it kills someone. God's law says that animal should be put to death, but it is not the fault of the owner of the animal. Okay, verse 29. But if the ox tended to thrust with its horn in times past, and it has been made known to his owner, and he had not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall be put to death. Whoa! Now we have an example of an animal that is not under control. This animal has killed in a past, and it's killed again. The owner is therefore responsible for that animal's actions and gets the death penalty. But, look at verse 30. If there is imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life, whatever is imposed on him. Whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter, according to this judgment, it shall be done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So now we got something different. So this ox has killed somebody, and the family member of that person that has been killed says, I don't want you to die. I want you to give me a sum of money. That's negotiated by the judges. But now he's saying also here, if a servant is killed by an animal, then he has to pay 30 shekels of silver. That's the price of a servant. Does 30 shekels of silver sound familiar in the New Testament? Who was given 30 shekels of silver for betraying somebody? The price of a slave. Interesting. Verse 33. Now, if a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. A problem we have often, right? You're just walking around and there's a pit and your dog falls in it and dies, right? Now again, in this culture, pits were usually dug for storage, maybe sometimes to trap an animal. You remember Joseph? What did his brothers do to him? They threw him in a pit and used it as a prison, right? So this law is basically giving us a law of responsibility for someone's actions and responsibility for the consequences of those actions. So if someone digs a pit and that pit is not properly covered or marked, and if an animal falls into this pit and is injured or dies, the owner of the pit is responsible to compensate for the animal. Okay? Make sense? Are you having fun yet? We're not even halfway done. Verse 35, if one man's ox hurts another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money for it. And if the dead ox, they shall also divide it. Or if it was known that the ox tended to thrust in times past, then the owner has not kept it confined, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall be his own. Now again, there's an interesting scenario painted here. And what we understand or what we see is that judges who are set up by the Lord, let's say the detectives, right? They research and investigate what is warranted and what needs to happen in this specific scenario. This application for this law requires that judges of the city find out the intent or the negligence of the owners of the ox for all people involved. And what God is laying out here is that the justice system, a general principle, is that everything should be fair and balanced. All from this little ox story, right? Interesting. Chapter 22. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. Now here's another interesting view or principle about theft. See, in our day and age, when someone steals something, what happens? Police come and arrest them and they go to jail. In God's economy, if you steal something, you pay 5 times if it's an ox and 4 times if it's a sheep. So you have to pay or reimburse who you stole from the value of what you have stolen. Remember commandment number 8, thou shalt not steal? Now, you go spend 30 days in jail or whatever your sentence is for stealing something, that might be a punishment. But what if you had to repay 5 times what you stole? Depends on what you stole, right? If you stole a $120,000 Mercedes, 5 times that, you're going to be working a long time, aren't you? Do you think that would deter people from stealing? I don't know. Verse 2. If a thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. So this is not murder if you're defending yourself or your home. Do you think that would deter people from breaking into somebody's house and stealing their stuff? Verse 3. If the son, again, we're talking about the same scenario here, if the son has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall restore double. So you've taken a swing at somebody that's tried to steal from you. You don't kill him, you just injure him, right? They must pay for what they tried to steal from you double. If the thief has broken in and he doesn't have any money, then he must work for the value of the attempted theft. Interesting concept to deal with thieves, right? Verse 5. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal, and it feeds on another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. So your cattle gets off your land, and your cattle gets on my land and starts eating all my crops. You are responsible for repaying me for what your cattle has eaten. But it's not repaying just whatever you got laying around, the leftovers. You're supposed to repay me the best of what you have. Do you think people will keep their cattle in their own property, on their own property? Yeah, they probably would, right? Now again, remember, we've got 1.5 million people that are all at the bottom of a mountain. And imagine what kind of, remember when we looked at that Jethro principle a few Wednesdays back? And everybody was constantly coming to Moses whining about, well, they did this, and their cattle ate my land. And Moses was trying to deal with all this, and his father-in-law said, dude, you need to get some help, right? So now there's clarity about this help. This is how the people are to be judged. Verse 6, if fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so that stacked grain, standing grain, or field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. Okay, this is what we would call today vandalism, right? And vandalism has consequences. You don't go to jail and all this damage is done. No, you have to go pay for what you have destroyed. What if that concept was implemented? Are you enjoying this? Hopefully this is, I find this really interesting, and it's like, why don't our laws do some of this stuff, right? Verse 7, if a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. So if I ask you to keep an envelope containing 400 pounds cash, and then I ask you to keep my Rolls Royce in your garage while I go to Egypt for a couple of weeks, okay? I'm just trying to paint something totally elaborate. Number one, I don't have a Rolls Royce, and I don't plan on going to Egypt, and I do not have $400 cash. All right, so in your care, you got my stuff, and somebody comes in and takes that money and steals my car. The thief is later found, but again, in God's law, the thief does not go to jail. The thief has to pay back double the value of my money and my car. If the thief isn't found, then the judges of the city start investigating to determine who's at fault and who repays. Listen, these kind of scenarios, judgment is never left up to me who got their stuff stolen or you who had care of my stuff. It is always determined by somebody outside, and it's supposed to be fair and balanced, right? Verse 9, if for any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or clothing, or for any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whomever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. So here, remember finders keepers, right? That law doesn't apply in God's economy. It doesn't work that way. So I lost my chainsaw a few weeks ago, and I'm having coffee at your house, and I see my chainsaw sitting on your front porch. Like, dude, that's my chainsaw. And you go, well, I bought it at a pawn shop. Or, well, I just found it, and so I thought I would keep it. But my name's on it, right? Okay. So the case is taken to the judges of the city, and they investigate, and the outcome of who gets the chainsaw is not determined by you or me, but the judges. And whoever has been found guilty also has to pay double restitution. See, in this sense, we got to be super, super careful because there's an underlying principle here. False accusations might get someone in trouble. Remember that sin in Deuteronomy? God says something interesting. It's not a sin, but he says something interesting. He says, be sure your sins will find you out, right? Time will reveal a lot of things, and sometimes we just got to wait. I had a good friend of mine tell me this. He said, there's an interesting principle. He said, patience is the weapon that forces deception to reveal itself. You might want to write that down. That one's pretty good, right? I'd love to say it was mine, but it wasn't. Verse 10, if a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any animal to keep, and it dies, it's hurt, or is driven away, no one seeing it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between both of them, that he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept that, and he shall not make it good. So, another scenario, I'm going to Egypt for a couple of weeks, and I ask you to watch my dog. I don't own a dog. And while I'm gone, my dog gets hurt and dies in your care. But there's no witnesses to the accident. There's no witnesses that saw this happen. So whatever agreement that you and I agreed upon about keeping my dog, well, that agreement must be kept, right? So you kept my dog, you took care of it, something happened. Now I have to trust and accept your word in that agreement. And there's something interesting here too. People are innocent until they are proven guilty. Verse 12. But if, in fact, it is stolen from him, talking about my dog again, he shall make restitution to the owner for it. If it is torn into pieces by a beast, then he shall bring the evidence, and he shall not make good what was torn. So if there's foul play involved, restitution is required. But if there's evidence of just the accident, then that is just what it is. It was an accident, and there is no judgment or restitution required for accidents. Verse 14. If a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it becomes injured or dies, the owner of it, not being with it, he shall surely make it good. If its owner was with it, he shall not make it good. If it was hired, it came for its hire. So again, let's throw another scenario up here. These are fun, right? So you asked me to borrow my ox to plow your fields, right? I don't have an ox, and you probably don't have any fields, so we're good. And while you're using my ox, I'm with you, and we're discussing the Manchester United game, right? And while we're having that discussion, my ox gets hurt or just falls over dead. It is not your responsibility in this scenario to repay me for borrowing me my ox or giving me restitution for that ox. Now, if you rented my ox and my ox died, well, that's it. That's all the restitution I get. Now, there's another interesting principle here to guide God's law of judgment. See, if the party is guilty, they need to make it right. But sometimes there are distinctions that must be made or evaluated by the judges. See, sometimes there's things that just happen and there's no one to blame. Verse 16, if a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. Now we must remember something here. God's design for sexual relationship is between a man and woman that are committed in a marriage relationship. Outside of the marriage covenant, sexual activity in God's eyes is sin. So here we have a man that convinces, or the Bible says entices, a woman who is not betrothed. She's not committed to another man, and he entices her to have sex with him. And the law says that if you want to eat your cake, you have to pay for it. You understand? Okay. So he must now pay the dowry to the father for her hand in marriage. That's it. But let's say dad finds out about this, and he knows that he's a little upset, and he knows that this guy is not the man for his daughter. He's allowed to step in and refuse to allow him to marry her. And the law says that this man who enticed the young girl still has to pay her family the dowry. And what we see here is something interesting. God holds again a high value on marriage and the physical relationship that comes with marriage. Our world today, no surprise, holds no value whatsoever to physical relationship that God has designed for man and woman in the marriage covenant. Our society has no value for it. I mean, I've heard this. Well, you got to drive a car before you buy it. You ever heard that? That excuse? Listen, that's just an excuse. Because, see, God says that part of the relationship is super important to him. It's of high value. Hebrews says marriage is honorable above all, and God will judge fornicators and adulterers. He's serious about it. And our world today has thrown it and made it trash and awful. But God says it's something amazing. Verse 18. Now, there's a couple here that don't need any explanation. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Everybody understand that one? Okay. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. No explanation. Verse 20. He who sacrifices to any god except to the Lord only, he shall utterly be destroyed. Now, again, this is a re-emphasis of the first commandment. God said we should have no other gods before him. Now, at the end of Israel and Judah's reigns as nations before Assyria took over Israel and Babylon came and destroyed Judah, there was one major problem within those two nations: idolatry. And that's one of the reasons they were judged. Now, this law, we only get one instance in Scripture that this law was actually applied. And that was when Elijah killed the prophets of Baal. Remember, after the competition, so to speak, and Elijah killed 400 Baal worshipers, and all of a sudden Israel turned for a time. Verse 21, you shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Now, there's something to be said about someone's character when it comes to the treatment of strangers. God says to treat strangers well. Israel should understand what it means to be strangers because they were in a foreign land for 400 years. And God's just saying this: listen, don't treat people like Egypt treated you. Verse 22, you shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way, then they shall cry to me, and I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. Now, the Old Testament prophets reprimanded the nation's leaders for the neglect of the weak and the helpless. But we are commanded by God as well today to look after vulnerable people as well. See, God promises here that he will protect them. But we must understand something. It's very possible that God might want to use you or me in this area as well. In James chapter 1, verse 27, he says, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Right? We often define religion as something else, but the Bible is clear. You want to be religious? Then take care of people. Take care of the widows and the fatherless kids. Verse 25. If you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like the moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. So God's saying, listen, you can lend people money to help them, but people that are in need, people that are poor, you shouldn't charge them interest. That's interesting. Verse 26, if you take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? And it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am gracious. Now, this is a principle of collateral, right? Under certain circumstances, some things were not acceptable for collateral, like taking someone's only coat. See, God hears the prayer of the poor and needy. He says right here that he does. We're almost done. Now, here's a verse. You guys are ready for this one? Here's a verse that you're going to want to memorize. You're going to want to put this one on your refrigerator. You're going to want to walk by it every day. Ready? Verse 28. You shall not revile God nor curse the ruler of your people. Now, as believers in Jesus, we need to understand something. We represent God not only in our actions, but in our words as well. we are also responsible for the words that we speak about the authority that God has placed before us. Ephesians 4:29, we looked at this one Sunday. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Now, look at this. We all know what corrupt words are. Those shouldn't come out of our mouths. But what we do say should be good for necessary edification. That means for building people up. And it should be gracious. How many of you like to be told off? I don't. Do you? Right. But how much do you like it when somebody just says something really positive, uplifting to you, that just like, hey, man, I can get through the rest of this day just because of this conversation we had? That's wonderful, isn't it? Verse 29. You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce or your juices. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days, and on the 8th day you shall give it to me. So we are to honor the Lord by giving him what is due him. And there's something interesting here. We should never delay in our giving to him. Now, he's talking about produce. You know, we don't live in an agrarian society nowadays. We use money, we buy stuff, and we go get a paycheck and all this kind of stuff. So I just want to talk about giving in a financial perspective for a moment. Missy and I, years ago, we were convicted about something. We used to sit down together and pay our monthly bills, and our tithe was the last thing that we paid. Because here was our thought process. If there's anything left, then we'll give some to God. And we were convicted about that. I mean, we were not in the right place in giving what was due the Lord. So we prayed about how much to give, right? The New Testament does not tell you a certain amount. That's between you and the Lord. So the Lord spoke to us, and then we decided to change our process. So now with every paycheck, the first thing we wrote out was our tithe check. And then we paid the rest of our bills. Now, Proverbs 3, verses 9 and 10 says something interesting. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all your increase, so that your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. See, I think it's funny that and Missy and I experienced this, before this change, it always seemed that we never had enough money every month. But when we decided to put the Lord first in our giving, his provision was always there. We never lacked. Verse 31, and you shall be holy men to me. You shall not eat meat torn by beast in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. Now, what does the word holy mean? Set apart, yeah, to be different. So you and I are called, just like Israel was called, to be different than the world around them. Israel was being called to change specifically what they ate for dinner. So food was not a luxury like back then as it is for us. If we need something, we drive down the road to Tesco or Morrison's, right? And we go buy what we need, and then we eat it. So in this culture, like if a sheep was mauled by a predator, it was common to take the remaining of that carcass and to use what they could for food. Now, it's not a right or wrong thing, but that's what they did. But God is saying, listen, you should do something different. God says that process is going to change now. See, that's what animals do. And you are called to be holy. You're called to be different. And I don't want you eating that way anymore. Now